So this is an excerpt from the website Medline Plus. And so this is kind of like a catalog of illnesses, diseases, and all the information about them. So I looked up the genetic nature of type 1 diabetes. So causes of type 1 diabetes are unknown. Several risk factors have been identified, and then it talks about the gene variants. Okay, so I want you to focus kind of on those first three letters, HLA, right? So HLA, then you have, DQA1, DQB1, DRB1 genes, but HLA is the kind of the main family of those genes. So these genes provide instructions for making proteins that play a critical role in the immune system. And then it goes on to say that HLA stands for human leukocyte antigen complex. That's what that HLA. So pause for a second there. Let's just break that word down, right? So human, obviously, it's for us because we're human. Leukocyte is another word for white blood cell, right? So a leukocyte is a white blood cell, and when you think of white blood cell, that should be synonymous in your mind with having to do with immunity, right? White blood cells are kind of pictured as the soldiers of the immune system, protecting us from antigens. Antigens are foreign bodies, toxins, pathogens, things like that our body identifies as other. So in that last sentence, the HLA complex helps the immune system distinguish the body's own proteins from proteins made by foreign invaders, such as viruses and bacteria. So this aligns perfectly with our autoimmune disease understanding of the development of type 1 diabetes, right? So if HLA is responsible for distinguishing between self and other, and there's an issue with that, then that explains why our immune system, quote unquote, attacked the beta cell, right? Because it misidentified the beta cell as foreign and it eliminated it, right? So when I looked a little bit further into that HLA complex, obviously, like I mentioned before, it's involved in distinguishing foreign pathogens from bodily proteins, but it has ties to all sorts of autoimmune conditions, and you'll see there in that first bullet, on the second bullet down, half of all genetic variables resulting in autoimmune conditions are traced to changes in the HLA genes, right? So this is a hotbed for the development of autoimmune conditions. Okay, so the conditions included rheumatoid arthritis, hemochromatosis, which is iron overload, lupus, and multiple sclerosis, right? So all of these conditions where the body's immune system is perceived to have attacked itself, it ties back to the HLA complex. Now, the thing that this opened my mind up to, like when you hear someone suffers from arthritis, right? You don't hear that it's genetic, do you? I don't, right? Like my parents, or my dad specifically has arthritis. And again, he's not getting the genetic talk like, oh, it's genetic, there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, he's getting a prescription to take care of it. But again, no mention of genes, no mention of a genetic origin, and that there's nothing he could do about it. So for me, that opened up the possibility of like, okay, well, why wouldn't type 1 diabetes be treated the same? And the same goes for all of those other ones, iron overload, lupus, and multiple sclerosis as well. And again, that is not a comprehensive list. There are more conditions associated with those HLAs. Like I said, half of those autoimmune conditions. So pretty impressive. Now, this is from that same website, that Medline Plus, that distinguished what HLA actually was. So in those variants associated with type 1 diabetes, which are called haplotypes, right? The DQA1, the DQB1, So there are certain haplotypes, or we'll just call them versions of the gene, that are associated with the higher risk of developing type 1 diabetes. Now, these versions seem to increase the risk of the inappropriate immune response against the beta cells, right? Because that's really all we're interested in as diabetics, because our HLA gene variants targeted our beta cells. So, but get this, however, these variants are also found in the general population, and only about 5% of individuals with the gene variants develop type 1 diabetes. So, what you're saying is that we're being told that type 1 diabetes is genetic because we have these variants of those HLA genes, and that there's, that's what it is. Sorry, we're still figuring things out. But that there are a lot more people in the general population with those exact same genes that do not have type 1 diabetes. Not only that there are others, that the majority of those with the same genes that we have don't have type 1 diabetes. 5%? That is so not convincing. That is not at all convincing. So only 5% of the people with the quote unquote type 1 diabetes genes are actually type 1 diabetic. That plants seeds of doubt in my mind. Big, big seeds of doubt. Okay, so then you scroll down to the bottom. Additional contributors, such as environmental factors and variations in other genes, are also thought to influence the development of this complex disorder. So, turns out the specific gene combinations tied to type 1 diabetes are also found in the general population, only of which 5%, so 95% of the people that have the same genes that got you type 1 diabetes don't have type 1 diabetes. That is not a strong correlation. So may those gene complexes or versions of that gene have a tie to diabetes, or maybe serve as a contributing factor? Maybe. But is it a certainty? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So what are those confounding variables in the 5% that having those genes caused us to pass the threshold into type 1 diabetes?